I'm Lisa Senecal.
And I'm Maya May, and we're speaking The Shadow Network with Ann Nelson starts now.
This is going to be so much
wild ride,
dark fun.
Wild ride.
To talk about this.
You're going to want to be sitting down for this, is what we're saying.
Sitting down, maybe have a drink.
Yeah.
A drink can't hurt in these circumstances.
Might help.
Yeah. Yeah, because let me tell you a brief story about yesterday. I have had Ann Nelson's book in my head and my dreams, and just been swimming in it for a week or so now. And I went and got my hair done yesterday to return it to its natural color. And normally when I go in, I chat about whatever the next show is going to be, because they know that I do the show and we chat about all this stuff. And I started trying to talk about this, and I was saying things like, well, there's a shadow network, and there's been a 40-year effort, and it involves Christian dominionists and the Koch brothers and the DeVos family and the Department of Justice and senators and congresspeople and presidents dating back to Reagan and theocracy and goals of the Seven Mountains. And I was like, you cannot talk about this.
Yeah, you absolutely. Today I was at a school event for my daughter, and some of the parents were like, "Oh, you're gonna have a fun show tonight?" And I was like, "Yeah, we're talking about the conspiracy web of this group, the CNP." And they just looked at me and nodded, and I was like,
"But you don't sound like a crazy person."
Yeah.
That this can be real, but it is.
It is very real. And that is why it is so important that we have Ann Nelson joining us tonight, because she has done the exploration, the research. She's attended and listened to conversations with the people, the very, 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 very conservative, I want to say far right, but it feels like they're right in our faces right now, because they have infiltrated every level of government, organizations, companies. And I don't use the word infiltrate lightly. It is a part of their plan. So we're going to approach this the way we'd approach a true crime podcast. We're going to have fun with this. We're going to understand the characters who are the real people who are dominating what's happening in the GOP Republican. Yes, the villains. The villains. So with that,
we need to take all the time we possibly have today to be talking with Ann Nelson. We are so excited to have her with us this evening. She's a research scholar at Columbia University and an award-winning author of The Shadow Network, Media, Money, and the Secret Hub of the Radical Right, which traces the history of the Council for National Policy, covert opera. It's just all I'm going to start sounding like a crazy person again. So we're just going to go through this with Ann. Thank you so much for being here.
Oh, well, thank you for having me. And, I'm so not a crazy person.
You are not.
I am just so boring. And sometimes I try not to be pedantic. Mm-hmm. And, when I was writing that book, I was like, could this really be real? And then I'd go on YouTube and watch them say with their mouths these words. And I'd include, as you know, 1,000 footnotes with the URL and a time code so people can see for themselves. It's all there. I'm not making anything up.
Yeah. Right. It sounds like a Scandal episode that would have gotten thrown in the trash, because it's just not believable at all. But you go into this massive network of money, right-wing Christian nationalism, so much money. Before we go forward, there's a particular villain, Paul Weyrich, if I'm saying his name correctly.
We'd say Weyrich.
Paul Weyrich. Who is he, and why does this focus on Seven Mountains, which just sounds crazy already? Seven Mountains dominionism. Why does that matter?
Yeah, there are a few religious organizations and affiliations that believe in Seven Mountains dominionism. And they take the name from the verse in Genesis that man shall have dominion over all the birds of the air and the fish of the sea and so on. And they kind of extend that to mean that they should have dominion over everything. So oil companies can rape the environment because they can dominate it, and that they should have dominion over the rest of us because they have a direct line to God and we don't. That's the basic thinking. And Paul Weyrich was this strategist who is in his own way quite brilliant, right? We're not talking about stupid people here. Right. And he was very disappointed back in the day when he was working on the Goldwater campaign and it lost. And he said, we need to create networked organizations if we're going to take over the country. And so he started with the Council for National Policy, the CNP, and the Heritage Foundation, which everybody should know about because it's like a think tank. Right. And ALEC, the American Legislative Exchange Council, which creates very conservative bills and gets them passed in a conservative state and then leverages them across state lines. Right.
And I noticed on the ALEC website, they describe themselves as nonpartisan. Which...
Yeah. You know, some of these organizations don't always tell the truth.
No.
I'm sorry.
Say it ain't so.
I know you're shocked, but yeah, get over it. So yeah, ALEC is behind a lot of these so-called heartbeat bills, which impose really draconian laws on pregnant women. And now they've spread to many, I don't know how many states at this point. It's in the double digits, because it's continuing to spread. And ALEC has been a driver of that. So Weyrich was this, dark genius behind a lot of these ideas. And the Council for National Policy was supposed to serve as an umbrella organization that would pull together big donors like the DeVos family. It would pull in others who were not religiously affiliated, like the Koch network. And then it would link them to strategists like Weyrich and Richard Viguerie and grassroots so-called organizations who could put people out to do political canvassing, like the National Rifle Association and the Susan B. Anthony organization, which is the one that is right now on Capitol Hill driving for a national law limiting abortion. So there, it's been going for over 40 years, and it's highly coordinated. They've had a lot of money, but their real superpower has been this level of highly coordinated activity that you saw leading into the 2020 election after helping to bring Trump to power, and then as well on January 6th, and right now on this drive for the independent state legislature doctrine to overturn the 2024 election.
And their end game, because you hinted at it, total dominion, because their end game isn't democracy. It doesn't sound like that's what it is. What is their end game so people can really hear that?
To turn us all into their peons.
Okay. I don't want to be a peon.
I don't either. You know, the Middle Ages had its downside, especially for women. So no, really, I talk about it as a gated community, because the money interests behind them, both the religiously linked, like the DeVos family, and the less religious, like the Kochs, they don't want to pay taxes. So they don't want to pay corporate taxes. They don't want to pay taxes for extremely wealthy individuals. And therefore, they need to do away with social programs that require taxes to pay for them. So they are against public education. They're against public health measures. They're obviously against Medicare and Medicaid and Social Security. And they're trying to sell it to largely uneducated voting populations as saying, this is freedom because we're having tax cuts and you won't have to pay taxes. And of course, these poor low-income people don't realize that these policies would drive their entire cost of living higher while lowering their quality of life, exclusively to the benefit of the wealthiest of the Americans.
So there's has become, for religious organizations to be involved in this seems so ironic, because this is a total unholy alliance that all of these different organizations, and you were just starting to describe, they sort of have the same end game, but they don't even agree with each other or really like each other, other than the goal of domination and dominion at the end. But to have Trump be the the person who is going to help deliver what a religious right-wing religious group wants makes far less sense than like the Koch brothers. That I could get, but they're all willing to trade on one another. Does this fall apart at any point, or is that end goal enough?
Well, right now, if this were a chess match, we'd be in the end game. So we have two scenarios before us. If they take Congress, then they have promised to impeach Biden and Kamala Harris. If they take the Senate, they will prevent any federal judiciary appointments for the foreseeable. They've already shown they know how to do that. So they will cripple the Biden administration and pass laws that will enable them to win elections regardless of the popular vote. That's what's on the board right now. That's what they're working towards. If, on the other hand, the Democrats won both houses of Congress, I would expect them to pass laws to make all of the above impossible, right? And the Council for National Policy and these plutocrats and their fundamentalist stalking horses, they're using fundamentalist populations with the assistance of so-called leaders. And so, they're basically selling them this bill of goods, but at the same time, they've been cultivating this voting bloc for, maybe 10 years or so. Ralph Reed has been a driver of this. And they understand that this population is dropping. A lot of these churches, like the Southern Baptists, are losing members. The young people are moving away from them. The number of self-declared Christians in the US population is expected to go into a minority space. So they are going for broke, like the next 2 months. This is it.
So if we're in a societal endgame, and we were talking about this a bit before the show, we're not really hearing people sound the alarms. I mean, we're sounding the alarms, but it seems like sometimes we're just all, shouting at each other, oh my God, everything, what's happening? And people aren't paying attention. And I wonder if it's because people don't realize that they're capable of doing this because they don't understand the background of these different organizations and how they work together. I'd never heard of the Leadership Institute. When I went to their website and I saw like, oh, wow, 250,000 conservative activists trained. And now these people are everywhere. The NRA, Walmart, GOP, SCOTUS, LL Bean. Like, I thought LL Bean was like a good thing. It's supposed to be like Patagonia. And so is there a disconnect that people just possibly can't fathom the fact? Like, what's happening that we're not acting?
I think several things are happening. I think that people who live in the coasts and in large cities have a news media that tends to downplay these dangers. And you referred earlier to both sidesism. There's a lot of that going on. So it's Democrats on the one side and the Republicans on the other side. And there are a few people like Sheldon Whitehouse and Jamie Raskin who are sounding the alarm. And they're using the fascist word, and they're saying this is really a contest between democracy and an authoritarian government or autarky. That's what we're voting on. So what you're going to have, I believe, is a doubling down of Democratic voters who are concerned on the coasts and in large urban areas. But as I say in the book, you have millions and millions of Americans who live in areas where they don't have access to real journalism anymore. They're called news deserts, and they are being bombarded with propaganda of the most vile and hateful and mendacious nature. They're being told that they are told that Democrats support executing healthy newborn babies. And if you don't have an alternate, source of information, and your entire community is hearing this in church and on the radio and in the school boards that they're taking over, then they believe it. So it is truly an information war.
The media seems hesitant to go right at organizations that have any religious affiliation. do you, is there a way for the press to be more responsible in the way they're handling this without having to fear that they're going to be accused of either stifling free speech or freedom of religion, or being, the media is already seen as being left-leaning, and, they're going to be labeled as atheists and the antichrists and all the rest of that. But is there something the media could be doing that's a whole lot better than what they're doing right now?
Well, I think they could be covering it in more detail. And of course, a lot of daily reporting, you're just chasing yesterday's story. And so many reporters I talk to, they say, oh, I don't have time to read a book, right? And even people who publish stories on the CNP will say, oh, I dipped into your book. And it's like, well, it's really an architectural argument with a lot of parts to it that really builds to a conclusion.
Right.
And it's not a story you can comprehend, like with little 10-second dips here and there. So there is the attention span problem. But I also see another problem, which is that you have an idea gaining traction, which is to blame Christian nationalism and white supremacy. And that is leading people astray, because you have a lot of people in critical swing states such as Arizona, Nevada, Florida, North Carolina, Georgia, who say, oh, I'm a Christian and I love my country, so that makes me a nationalist. So what's wrong with that, right? And they feel like they're being accused of something they haven't done.
Right.
So you actually have people, both politicians and social media people, embracing a term that's supposed to be a warning of a danger. Right. And the other thing is that it is not broad enough. The Koch brothers, that's not a Christian enterprise. They're libertarian, and from what I can gather from years of research, they're basically atheist. Right. So no religious principles invade their rhetoric in any way. And you also have somebody like Barry Seid, who just contributed 1.6 billion with a B dollars to Leonard Leo to tamper with elections. And he's a Jewish businessman in Chicago who spends a lot of money supporting Israel. Now, is he a Christian nationalist? I doubt it. And if we don't name it, and name it in a way that allow people to understand the menace, then it's going to be a losing proposition. And by the same token, there's an article in the Washington Spectator that came out yesterday about the MAGA military bloc who are running for Congress, and a large percentage of them are people of color. So these are right-wing military election deniers being promoted by Steve Bannon. And if the press comes at them and talks about white supremacy, they're going to say, look, we have more people of color running than you do. Deal with that, Democrats. So that's why we really have to refine the argument and figure out how to appeal to swing voters who are not well informed.
I am absolutely picking up what you are putting down, because it's this idea of that we need to simplify everything. And so then people just hear white nationalists, like, I'm hearing you and I'm going, okay, hear me out. True crime podcasts, America loves these things, and it does require an attention span. And I'm wondering if because when I watched the January 6th committee, I feel like it's very much playing out the way a true crime podcast would. Is there a way to tell an entertaining, engaging, meeting people where they're at story? Should we be turning to social media? Should we be what are the best ways to tell this story? And maybe, I don't know, do you want to do a podcast with us?
My hair is on fire, so I'll talk to on your podcast, because there's just so much at stake here. There really is. I guess I take so much of this personally. I'm from Oklahoma. So they've been like the test case for a lot of these policies. And you have people who have their public education being stripped of funding, and rural schools where kids have textbooks that are falling into pieces. The teachers are leaving the profession in droves because, they're trying to make it on $30,000 a year. So when you go after public education, people suffer. When you go after abortion rights, women suffer. They have laws right now where women with ectopic pregnancies are expected to die rather than get the proper medical procedure, because the life of a fertilized egg that will never be a baby is valued over the life of a woman. Right. So, I mean, I have a daughter, and the prospect of living in a society that is run by such poorly informed and cruel policies is not acceptable to me.
Well, and we're already seeing the real world results. Lisa, you and I were talking about that case, the story in Missouri about corporal punishment.
Yeah, corporal punishment is coming back. And we have JD Vance talking about how women should stay in abusive relationships. And we really are moving back to the Middle Ages. And a lot of people don't, what you're saying, they're not recognizing the situation that we're in, how mission critical it is right now, and how close we are to not being able to reverse where we're going. So what is the right framing? This isn't a Christian right. It's not a white nationalist. What is the framing that everyone can understand and embrace, that isn't going to either have people alienated because they think that you're talking about them and it doesn't fit, or that the language we are using is talking about white nationalists, and there are a lot of people of color that are now being used by the right.
Yeah. And also I think this is a problem of the news media, which is always wanting to go after the photo op, like the Charlottesville demonstration, without digging deeper into who these people are and asking, okay, why are there people of color in this demonstration? Right. Why are there people of color carrying guns in Black Lives Matter demonstration against Black Lives Matter? Who are these people? How are they being, pulled into this toxic movement? And the answer to part of that is through the Pentecostal churches, which have a whole different structure than the other fundamentalist churches. And the Pentecostals or charismatic are the ones where people are speaking in tongues. And there are many, many mega churches across the country that have a sizable minority population, that have a lot of new immigrants, and they're being told by their pastors that they have to join this movement, and they're being recruited from there into militias like the Proud Boys and the Oath Keepers. So I think that it requires, almost like a parallel operation to the sophistication of the Council for National Policy. You look at those critical states, and I reeled off a bunch of them just now, but add Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin to the ones that I mentioned, and you say, all right, first of all, you register new voters.
Well, it looks like we lost Anne for a minute, but
hopefully able to come right back with us.
Right, because those are the states that we're talking about at the Lincoln Project, the ones that she named that are races that are critical and key to not just 2022, but 2024. And so I would love to hear from her about what we can do more like boots on the ground, because right now, Lisa, you and I were talking, we're behind. It's like they're 40 years ahead of us on this shadowy network of building these, because I think I'm not sure which one who said this, but he's like, we have to basically debilitate their grassroots organizations and build up ours. And so what we face now is like, we have this kind of like this loose network of democracy loving people that we're now trying to kind of pull together at the last minute. And that's what has me a little bit nervous, because I'm like, okay, we don't got a lot of time. We have 55 days until the midterms. Right.
Well, my hope, and you and I are always looking for what is that, what's the positive spin? What's the ray of hope? What is it that we hang on to and see as a building block to try to expand on? And I think that to some degree, the right now is doing some of the work for us.
True.
They really are. We were talking about this. They're not just the dog who caught the car. They're the dog who caught the train. And doubling down yesterday for Lindsey Graham on what is obviously a losing issue for them on abortion bans. Anne, great. We're so glad you
can't do this without you, but I was like, maybe she just wants to do the podcast. Maybe that's
Yeah, right.
We're moving right on to the next thing.
Sorry about that. Can I pick up where I left off?
Please.
Yes.
Absolutely.
So first of all, you register new voters. And that was the CNP's strategy for several decades. And they've tapped out a lot of the fundamentalist voting blocks in the states they needed. But right now, you've got this phenomenon, which is, a really interesting ray of hope, where in a number of states, you're having masses of women registering to vote. And I'm seeing I saw a figure today that in a number of swing states, you had an increase in female registrations by 35%. Now, let's remember how close these states are in terms of their differentials. The Arizona State Legislature, which is a critical body right now, lost to the Republicans by 1,000 votes.
Right.
So 1,000 votes in this picture is nothing. Mm-hmm. And the other very interesting thing is that the polls I'm seeing is that among a lot of these new female registrations, they used to tip 0.5% towards the Democrats, and now they're tipping 20. So these do not appear to be anti-abortion female registrants, because those are kind of tapped out. These appear to be women predominantly under 35 who are starting to understand that they should fear for their lives. And that is a message that women need to get out. And I think that that's a message you even have to share with women that you think are anti-abortion. Because, even if a conservative Republican woman is against abortion, she doesn't want her daughter to die from an ectopic pregnancy.
Right.
That's just so extreme. And we have to really explain to people that it's not the Democrats that are extreme and wanting to execute newborn babies. That is a lie. It is women dying from ectopic pregnancies that is a fact. And so you also can use their own arguments. Are you for law and order? Is that what January 6th looked like to you? Or did the attacks on Capitol policemen look like law and order for you? Well, connect the dots. And if you're supporting a Trump-endorsed candidate, that is the attack on law and order that you are, by extension, supporting. So let's talk about your values in your terms. Because ultimately what you're saying is, do you want a democracy under the rule of law in any way, shape, or form? Or are you comfortable with a violent dictatorship instead?
I love the combination of logic and emotion, because I do know what's waking up a lot of my friends who are in blue states. They're going, oh, national abortion ban? Oh, that's something that affects me, even though I moved to a place where I could hopefully be free. And now we're, also looking at, gay marriage potentially being threatened and a host of other things. And so I love hearing that voting can get us out of this. That can be our checkmate.
Well, it can, although we should be prepared for a very strong and possibly violent response. We know that they are arming. We know that they have significant recruits within police forces and sheriff's organizations. And I have to say that, I woke up on election day, the day after election day in 2016. I wrote my book because I said, what the hell just happened, right? After all of the predictions of a Hillary Clinton win, we just felt like we were all totally ambushed, informationally as well as politically. Well, we don't have that excuse now. There are a lot of very smart people and people in Congress, the January 6th committee and many others, who have been analyzing the hell out of this and making the information available. But it's not just a question of saying to blue state people, it's not a question of NIMBY anymore, because the reality of our political system is that, if you had 100% Democratic vote in New York and California, you could still lose the whole tamale based on these slivers of votes in the swing states. Right. And that's why I say, don't, if you're going to talk about the role of Christian churches, be nuanced, because the people who have been bamboozled into this movement are not all Christians. I don't think they're the majority of self-professed Christians. I think there's a Christian left, which gets some press, and there's a lot of people who go to church and celebrate Christmas who are on the sidelines and really don't understand what's happening.
Well, we so appreciate that you are sounding the alarm and trying to get the information out there about what's happening. That's certainly it's our reason for existence at the Lincoln Project, is to make sure people are aware of this and that they're taking action. So I really appreciate you sounding the alarm for the action that we need to be taking, and that reminder that blue states are not safe spaces to do nothing in. I live in one of those states. Maya lives in one of those states. We are all in this together if we want to continue to live in a democracy, and your work is certainly shining a light on that.
But I also want to stress that it's a matter of building bridges across the national divide. And that's not going to happen if you just attack people and ridicule them. You have to engage them and explain and listen. And then they have to be addressed by local spokespeople in their own language, expressing their own values. And that's a piece that's been missing. So it's you know, I would love to have a good country for my kids to live in, you know?
Same. Offer that. And I think that's why we are, working tirelessly, all of us. This conversation has been invigorating for me, also a little bit scary, I'm not going to lie. But it reminds me of how absolutely important it is that we continue to work together and engage in these difficult conversations now more than ever. So I thank you so much. And I really want you to come back and join us, because
I think it's the case, as usual, that moms didn't break it, but moms can fix it.
That is right there.
I love that. That's a good that's my hopeful thought that I'm going to hang on to and spread, because I think women are the answer, and they're going to hear us in November. So thank you so much, Anne, for being here with us.
Ann Nelson, pick up her book, and then we need to get out of analysis paralysis. I realize now, I feel like that's what's happening, is we're like, either we have too much information or not enough information, but we need to figure out how to act on the information that we do have, because 55 days, y'all. 55
days. And within, the next 20 minutes or so, I am going to be joining Rick Wilson and Jean Woodbury, who is from Equality Arizona, for a live discussion in Twitter Spaces. And we're going to be making sure people are up to speed and getting that information about what the latest goings on with Blake Masters, his endorsement yesterday of Lindsey Graham's national abortion ban.
I guess he's going to update his website again, because
right. I didn't actually mean it. I'm sure the campaign's trying to backpedal big time right now, but we are going to have that Twitter Spaces conversation at 8 p.m. tonight. So please do join us. It's really important. You do not need to be in Arizona to care about what's happening in Arizona. So please do join us shortly.
And tomorrow, check out The Breakdown with Tara Setmayer and Rick Wilson. They're returning at 7 p.m. Eastern, and we'll be joined by Andrew Kurtzman.
And speaking of Arizona, take a look at the latest ad from the Lincoln Project called The Right Stuff.
It's not often Arizona has a leader who's already proven himself in service to our country. That leader is Mark Kelly. Arizona has been lucky to have senators who put country over party and people over politics. Now Mark is ready to carry on that great Arizona tradition. Patriot, U.S. Navy pilot, American astronaut. Tested, courageous, steady. Mark makes Arizona and the country proud. Mark Kelly, a history of service, a record of accomplishment, an independent leader, and a proven American patriot.
Here we are in the flight deck of Endeavour, Flight Day 1.
Mark Kelly, an Arizona hero who always makes us proud.